Sam, how did you get involved in doing this documentary?
Yeah, so it kind of fell in our laps, you know, it's really amazing. Marshall, my partner and the director of the film, we were working on developing another project, and during that time, you know, we were working out of his own house, and his wife came home one day and said, "You'll never believe it, but the FBI, the federal government, just came and arrested this employee, Daniel McGowen, out of our office." And at that moment, we just sort of looked at each other and said, "Wow, what's going on?" So the film fell in our laps, and you know, with that access to Daniel, we just immediately just went out and started to try and investigate the story.
She knew him personally.
Yeah, and so did Marshall. You know, he had known him at you know, company picnics and that sort of thing. And that was able, you know, that was the sort of the seed that got us to start talking to Daniel and his family and investigate whether this was a project worth looking into, and absolutely it was. I mean, you know, at the time Daniel had talked about, it said that he was innocent, and it's not something that the film shows actually for narrative reasons, but you know, we didn't know then whether he had done it. But we knew that either way we'd have a film about a guy who was wrongfully accused of these staggering charges, or a guy who, you know, did it, and an investigation of why, and you know, why did he do it, why did these charges, you know, come in the way that they had. So it's pretty fortunate, you know, this topic was something that I was fascinated by, you know, even before this film fell in our laps, and so to have that sort of immediate access to it was just incredibly lucky, and you know, great to be able to just sort of investigate and figure out.
Before you started shooting the film,
yeah,
did you have any reservations about doing the documentary, and if so, what were they?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I think I don't know that I really had any reservations. You know, I think the one thing that was a concern was that we knew that our main subject would be under house arrest, which doesn't make for the most cinematic of you know, of circumstances to make a film. So there was that, but I think, you know, once we started talking to Daniel and figuring out the story further, it was clear that that there was so much more to tell than just his own story, and just, you know, within the walls of his own apartment. So you know, that concern sort of swept away. If there was something else, I think, you know, the uncertainty of it, you know, is always a concern. You don't know what's going to happen, and we didn't know if we'd film with Daniel up to a certain point and then he'd be snatched by the government and we'd never have access to him again. You know, that kind of stuff is nerve-wracking.
It was incredible, the closure. I mean, you had it where it was all the way up to his finally walking into the police station and being taken away. I mean,
yeah,
it was absolutely perfect. But one of the most intriguing characters in the whole film is the sister.
Yeah. Totally.
And you know, you were commenting that you were concerned about shooting the film, you know, in the constraints of the little apartment.
Yeah.
It was perfect, though.
Yeah. No, his sister is fantastic. So is Daniel's father and his wife. You know, they were all, I think, really important pieces of the story. You know, I think part of the thing with this movie is that, and the story is that people had sort of, you know, thought about these guys as terrorists, and once you say that, then, you know, you're all sort of, any sort of inquiry gets shut off because they're just monsters. And you know, having access to people like Daniel's sister and his wife and his father allowed us to humanize Daniel in a way that I think was important to say that, you know, this is more complicated than just simple label or a provocative label like terrorism.
What you said at the beginning, before the movie began, where there would be more questions than answers.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to be thinking about this documentary
Cool.
all through the day. I mean, it really does raise a lot of questions in my mind. As long as you are doing a commercial endeavor in the act of so-called terrorism, you are justified.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really, really interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think that's right. You know, someone said to us sort of similarly. They said, you know, if you're doing work in the name of business,
right,
and destruction happens to be the result of your work, well, you know, it's treated very differently than arson in the name of protecting the environment. And I think that is a real truth of the story. You know, one of the things that I found very interesting, you know, among others with the whole terrorism question was, you know, the government brought these charges against Daniel and his cohort because of motivation, right? They discuss that, you know, the charges, among other things, you know, were intended to coerce or intimidate the government. And we have other crimes that sort of get a special treatment because of motivation, like hate crimes, for example. But what's fascinating is that the group, you know, while they had obviously broken the law and done things that, you know, deserved punishment, they were not given any sort of special mitigation for the fact that their intentions were to protect the environment, or that their intentions were never to harm life. You know, they after all the incidents that had gone on with this cell, no one had ever been hurt, and that was not taken into account. And in fact, was sort of dismissed by the judge in the case. Which I think is just interesting, you know. Like anything, it's a question of priorities, and I think, you know, it became clear what the priority of the federal government was to get these guys and to sort of send a message.
And put a stop to other people doing the very same thing,
Absolutely.
which it seems as if it worked.
I think it did, you know, and you know, in some ways that's not such a bad thing. I mean, arson is a dangerous thing, and
violence is not good.
Violence is not good, and you know, I think, you know, had a devastating effect not just on the victims but also on the movement itself and the group of people that were, you know, impassioned to make a difference. And I think, as you see at the end of the film, everyone sort of, with the exception of, I think, Daniel and a few others, really were sort of devastated by it all. They had moved on, and sort of a lot of them have sort of renounced their past in ways that you know, I think they wouldn't have expected maybe years before.
What was when you first approached Daniel, can you describe what that was like when you brought up the idea of doing a documentary?
Yeah, well, the initial conversation was done by my partner, since he knew him personally already. But, you know, they had discussed the idea, and it was sort of, you know, yeah, let's see, that'll be interesting, let's see what happens. And then when I finally met Daniel and filmed with him the first time, you know, he was a little cagey, you know, and understandably so. Like, he was facing these staggering charges, and I think, you know, he didn't quite know how we would operate. He had seen Marshall's prior film, he hadn't known me yet, so I think there was a level of trust there, and that was important. But, you know, it was a huge leap of faith, like any documentary, to sort of allow a camera to come in and capture someone's life, and I think it just took time to sort of erode that sense of trepidation.
For being branded as a terrorist for the rest of his life, he has to be the most innocent, wonderful terrorist that I have ever had that pleasure of being able to see.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is sort of funny if you think about it in those terms. I mean, you know, this guy's a vegetarian because he doesn't want to harm things, and, you know, he like composts in his fridge, and you know, plays with his daughter, or his niece in the film. You know, it's not one's typical idea of what a terrorist is. Absolutely.
You have those two clips where the father's jumping into the little pool, and then he's jumping later in the movie. He's jumping into the pool. Yeah. That was kind of nice. I
love that part. Yeah, no, that was cool. That was cool.
So, is this your very first feature documentary?
This is the first documentary that I have a co-director's credit on. I've worked a bunch of other films as a producer, and a lot as a camera person. That's sort of how I got my start in doing this stuff. But
I loved your camera work.
Thank you so much.
The shots that you got in Oregon and the forests and whatnot, unbelievable.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you know, that was a challenge, actually. I kind of hadn't, you know, you think, what a beautiful place, you know, the landscape will shoot itself, you know, what do I have to do? But it turns out that shooting the forest is actually incredibly difficult, because of the lighting conditions and because of the density of trees, and it's very difficult to communicate scale, and it's very difficult to communicate, I guess, you know, diversity of species in a forest, and you know, that was something that we really struggled with. And I think we were lucky one day that it rained. It was like a light rain going on, and we were really concerned that you know, we'd have to bag the footage because the camera would be wet, and that would be that. But we went out anyways and shot, and it turns out those were just the perfect conditions, because the light was, you know, soft, and the light allowed a lack of contrast, which was able, you know, to be able to get that sense of density. So yeah, I know that was cool.
What was the major thing that you learned going through this whole experience? Wonderful experience.
Yeah.
What did you walk away with, having tucked away in your memory as something that you just really maybe didn't see before, and you know?
I don't know. That's a hard question. I mean, there's so many things about this film that sort of, surprised me and kind of pushed me in different directions. It is actually pretty hard to say there's one thing. I guess, if there is anything, it's the sense that, I think I grew as a filmmaker in making this film. I think that, we let the circumstances of the story and the complexity of the story push us, and rather than impose our own sort of preconceived sense of what was right and wrong, we allowed the complexity of the story to sort of dictate the way that we were going to tell it. And I think that was the right choice, and I think something that maybe when we started the film I wasn't prepared to do.
The thing I was really impressed by, everybody, the legal individuals, the police, everybody, you made everybody look good. I mean, everybody was wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, there really wasn't any real hatred or animosity.
Yeah. No, it's surprising, right? I mean, especially for a topic that has become so polarized. We were not expecting to run into that. And really one of the goals of the movie was to sort of tamper down that polemicism and tamper down that sense of ratcheted up irrationality, which is really what characterized the story.
The pinnacle point when it came to the decision on the EFL, are we going to just continue to do the buildings, or are we going to start targeting people? Right. That was
a shock.
That was poignant.
We didn't know that, and I don't think anyone really knew that. That had been a real shocker, because this was a group that for years had been sort of, among other things, really publicizing the fact that they were not interested in harming life, and the fact that there were people within the cell considering that as an option was a real surprise. Thankfully, no one ever carried that out, and actually, in some accounts, it sounds like it got kind of close, not to harming captains of industry, as the prosecutor says, but to harming each other. And that was, an interesting thing. It happens to a lot of social movements, and I think especially the most radical ones, is that unfortunately they tend to eat itself, and this movement really, that happened to them as well.
Yeah. What lies ahead for you? Do you have any other projects that you're working on?
I do. I have a couple of projects that I'm sort of cooking up that are in very early stages. But the thing that's next on the horizon that's coming up soon is a project that I've worked on for about 2.5 years as well, about the war on drugs. It's a film by the director Eugene Jarecki, and I've been working with him to try and make this film, which is going to be, I think it's going to be great. We shot in 20 states. It's going to be an epic
I kind of have an idea of what direction that's going in, and I'll really look forward to seeing that one.
Cool. Yeah, me too.
Sam,
thank you so much.
You are an amazing filmmaker.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thanks for doing this.
You bet.
Thanks for coming to see it.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Awesome.